12, Chapter 15, Biodiversity and Conservation. If an alien from a distant galaxy were to visit our planet Earth, the first thing that would amaze and baffle him would most probably be the enormous diversity of life that he would encounter. Even for humans, the rich variety of living organisms with which they share this planet never ceases to astonish and fascinate us. The common man would find it hard to believe that there are more than 20,000 species of ants, 3 lakh species of beetles, 28,000 species of fishes, and nearly 20,000 species of orchids. Ecologists and evolutionary biologists have been trying to understand the significance of such diversity by asking important questions. Why are there so many species? Did such great diversity exist throughout Earth's history? How did this diversification come about? How and why is this diversity important to the biosphere? Would it function any differently if the diversity was much less? How do humans benefit from the diversity of life? 15.1 Biodiversity. In our biosphere, immense diversity or heterogeneity exists not only at the species level but at all levels of biological organisms, ranging from macromolecules within cells to biomes. Biodiversity is the term popularized by the sociobiologist Edward Wilson to describe the combined diversity at all the levels of biological organization. The most important of them are: first, genetic diversity. A single species might show high diversity at the genetic level over its distributional range. The genetic variation shown by the medicinal plant Rauwolfia vomitoria growing in different Himalayan range might be in terms of the potency and concentration of the active chemical Raspine that the plant produces. India has more than 50,000 genetically different strains of rice and 1,000 varieties of mango. Second, species diversity. The diversity at the species level. For example, the Western Ghats have a greater amphibian species diversity than the Eastern Ghats. Third, ecological diversity. At the ecosystem level, India, for instance, with its desert, rain, forest, mangroves, coral reefs, wetlands, Asturias, and alpine meadows, has a greater ecosystem diversity than a Scandinavian country like Norway. It has taken millions of years of evolution to accumulate that rich diversity in nature, but we could lose all that wealth in less than 2 centuries if the present rates of species losses continue. Biodiversity and its conservation are now vital environmental issue of international concern as more and more people around the world begin to realize the critical importance of biodiversity for our survival and well-being on this planet. 15.1.1 How many species are there on Earth and how many in India? Since there are published records of all the species discovered and named, we know how many species in all have been recorded so far, but it is not easy to answer the question of how many species that are on Earth. According to the IUCN 2004, the total number of plant and animal species described so far is slightly more than 1.5 million, but we have no clear idea of how many species are yet to be discovered and described. Estimates vary widely, and many of them are only educated guesses. For many taxonomic groups, species inventories are more complete in temperate than in tropical countries, considering that an overwhelming large population of these species waiting to be discovered are in the tropics. Biologists make a statistical comparison of the temperate tropical species richness of an exhaustively studied group of insects and extrapolate this ratio to other groups of animals and plants to come up with a gross estimate of the total number of species on Earth. Some extreme estimates range from 20 to 50 million, but a more conservative and scientifically sound estimate made by Robert may place the global species diversity at about 7 million. Let us look at some interesting aspects about Earth's biodiversity based on the currently available species inventories. More than 70% of all species recorded are animals, while plants, including algae, fungi, bryophytes, gymnosperm, and angiosperm, comprise no more than 22% of the global percent of the total among animal insects are the most species-rich taxonomic group, making up more than 70% of the total. That means out of every 10 animals on this planet, 7 are insects. Again, how do we explain this enormous diversification of insects? The number of fungi species in the world is more than the combined total number of species of fishes, amphibians, reptile, and mammal. In figure 15.1, biodiversity is depicted showing species major or number of the major taxa. Figure 15.1 representing global biodiversity, proportionate number of species of major types of plant, invertebrates, and vertebrates. It should be noted that these estimates do not give any figure for prokaryotes. Biologists are not sure about how many prokaryotic species are there might be. The problem is that conventional taxonomic methods are not suitable for identifying microbial species, and many species are simply not culturable under laboratory conditions. If we accept biochemical or molecular criteria for declining species for this group, then their diversity alone might run into millions. India Although India has only 2.4% of the world's land area, its share of the global species diversity is an immense 8.1%. This is what makes our country one of the 12 mega diversity countries of the world. Nearly 45,000 species of plant and twice as many of the animal have been recorded from India. How many living species are actually there waiting to be discovered and named? If we accept May's global estimate, only 22% of the total species have been recorded so far. Applying this proportion to India's diversity figure, we estimate that there are probably more than 1 lakh plant species and more than 3 lakh animal species yet to be discovered and described. Would we ever be able to complete the inventory to the biological wealth of our country? Consider the immense trained manpower, taxonomists, and the time required to complete the job. The situation appears more hopeless when we realize that a large fraction of these species faces the threat of becoming extinct even before we discover them. Nature's biological library is burning even before we catalog. The title of this book, stock there. 15.1.2 Pattern of biodiversity. First, latitudinal gradient. The diversity of plant and animal is not uniform throughout the world but shows a rather uneven distribution. For many groups of animals or plant, there are interesting pattern in diversity, the most well known being the latitude gradient in diversity. In general, species diversity decreases as we move away from the equator towards the pole, with very few exceptions. Tropics latitudinal range of 23.5 degree north to 23.5 degrees south harbor more species than temperate as polar areas. Colombia, located near the equator, has nearly 1400 species of birds, while New York at 41 degree north has 105 species, and Greenland at 71 degree north only 56 species. India, with much more of its land area at the tropical latitude, has more than 1200 species of birds. A forest in a tropical region like equator has up to 10 times as many species of vascular plant as a forest of equal area in a temperate region like the Midwest of the USA. The largely tropical Amazonian rainforest in South America has the greatest biodiversity on earth. It is home to more of mammals, 427 of It is home to more than 40,000 species of plants, 3,000 of fishes, 1,300 of birds, 427 of mammals, 427 of amphibians, 375 of reptiles, and of more than 125,000 invertebrates. Scientists estimate that in these rainforests there might be at least 2 million insect species waiting to be discovered and named. What is so special about tropics that might account for their greater biological diversity? Ecologists and evolutionary biologists have proposed various hypotheses. Some important ones are: A. Speciation is generally a function of time. Unlike temperate regions subjected is frequent glaciation in the past, tropical latitude have remained relatively undistributed for millions of years and thus had a long evolutionary time for species diversification. B. Tropical environment, unlike temperate ones, are less seasonal, relatively more constant and predictable. Such constant environment promote neat specialization and lead to a greater species diversity, and there is more solar energy available in the tropics, which contribute to the higher productivity. This in turn might contribute indirectly to greater diversity. Second, species area relationship. During his pioneering and extensive exploration in the wilderness of South America jungles, great German naturalist and geographer Alexander von Humboldt observed that within a range of species richness increased with increasing explored area, but only up to a limit. In fact, the relation between species richness and area for a wide variety of taxa, angiosperm, plant, bird, bats, freshwater fishes turns out to be rectangular hyperbola. Figure 15.2. On a logarithmic scale, the relationship is a straight line described by the equation log s is equal to log c plus z log a, where s is equal to species richness, a is equal to area, z is equal to slope of the line, regression coefficient, c is equal to y intercept. Ecologists have discovered that the value of z lies in the range of 0.1 to 0.2 regardless of the taxonomic group or the region, whether it is the plant in Britain, birds in California, or mollusk in New York State. The slope of the regression line are amazingly similar, but if you analyze the species area relationship among very large areas like the entire continent, you will find that the slope of the line to be much steeper. Z value in the range of 0.6 to 1.2. For example, the frugivorous fruit-eating birds and mammals in the tropical forest of different continents, the slope is found to be 1.15. What do sleeper slope mean in the context? 15.1.3. The importance of species diversity to the ecosystem. Does the number of species in a community really matter to the functioning of the ecosystem? This is a question for what ecologists have not been able to give a definition answer. For many decades, ecologists believe that communities with more species generally tend to be more stable than those with less species. What exactly is a stability for a biological community? A stable community should not show too much variation in productivity from year to year. It must be either resilient to occasional disturbance, natural or man-made, and it must be the resistance to invasions by alien species. We don't know how these attributes are linked to species richness in a community, but David Timpson long-term ecosystem experiment using outdoor plots provides some tentative answer. Tillman found that plots with more species showed less year-to-year variation in total biomass. He also showed that in his experiment, increased diversity contribute to higher productivity. Although we may not understand completely how species richness contribute to the well-being of an ecosystem, we know enough to realize that rich biodiversity is not only essential for ecosystem health, but imperative for the very survival of the human race on this planet. At a time when we are losing species at an alarming pace, one might ask, does it really matter to us if a few species become extinct? Would Western Ghats ecosystem be less functional if one of its tree frog species is lost forever? How is our quality of life affected it? If, say, instead of 20,000 we only have 15,000 species of ants on Earth, there are no direct answer to such naive questions, but we can develop a proper perspective through an analogy but rather proper hypothesis used by Stanford ecologist Paul Enrich. In airplane ecosystem, all parts are joined together by thousands of rivets species. If every passenger traveling in it start popping a rivet to take home, causing a species to become extinct, it may not affect flight safety, proper functioning of the ecosystem initially, but as the rivets are removed, the plane become dangerously weak over a period of time. Furthermore, which rivet is removed may also be critical. Loss of rivets on the wings, key species that derive major ecosystem function, is obviously a more serious threat to function flight safety than loss of a few rivets on the seat of the window inside the plane. 15.1.4. Loss of biodiversity. While it is doubtful if any new species are being added through speciation into the earth treasury of species, there is no doubt about their continuing losses. The biological wealth of our planet has been declining rapidly, and accusing finger is clearly pointing to human activities. The colonization of tropical Pacific island of humans set to heavily to the extinction of more than 2,000 species of native birds. The IUCN Red List 2004 document the extinction of 784 species including 338 vertebrate, 359 invertebrate and 87 plant in the last 500 years. Some examples of recent extinction include the dodo, Mauritius, quagga, Africa, Thailasia, Australia, Steeler sea cow, Russia, and three subspecies Bali, Javan, Caspian of tiger. The last 20 years of have been witnessed the disappearance of 27 species. Carefully analyzed records showing that extinction across taxa are not random. Some groups like amphibian appear to be more vulnerable to extinction. Adding to the grim scenario of extinction is the fact that more than 15,500 species worldwide are facing the threat of extinction. Presently, 12% of all bird species, 23% of the mammal species, 32% of all amphibian species, and 31% of all gymnosperm species in the world face the threat of extinction. From a study of history of life on Earth through fossil records, we learned that large-scale loss of species like the one we are currently witnessing have also happened earlier, even before humans appeared on the scene. During the long period, more than 3 billion years since the origin and diversification of life on Earth, there were 5 episodes of mass extinction of species. How is the 6th extinction presently in progress different from the previous episode? The difference is in the rates. The current species extinction rate are estimated to be 100 to 1000 times faster than in the pre-human time, and our activities are responsible for the faster rates. Ecologists warn that if the present trends continue, nearly half of all these species on Earth might be wiped out within the next 100 years. In general, loss of biodiversity in a region may lead to a decline in the plant production, be lower resistance to environment perturbations such as drought and sea, increased variability and certain ecosystem processes such as plant productivity, water use, and pest and disease cycles. Cause of biodiversity losses: the accelerated rates of species extinction that the world is facing new are largely due to human activities. There are 4 major causes. The evil quarter is the sobriquet used to describe them. First, habitat loss and fragmentation. This is the most important cause of driving animals and plants to extinction. The most dramatic example of habitat loss comes from tropical rainforests, once covering more than 40% of the Earth's land surface. These rainforests now cover more than 6%. They are being more hectares of rainforest would have been lost. The Amazon rainforest, it is so huge that it is called the lungs of the planet, harboring probably millions of these species being cut and cleared for cultivating soybeans or for conversion to grassland for raising beef cattle. Beside total loss, the degradation of many habitats by pollution also threatens the survival of many species. When large habitats are broken up into small fragments due to various human activities, mammals and birds requiring large territories and certain animals and migrating habitats are badly affected, leading to the population decline. Second, overexploitation. Humans have always depended on nature for food, shelter, and but when need turns to greed, it leads to exploitation of natural resources. Many species extinction in the last 500 years. Tailor sea cow, passenger pigeon were due to overexploitation by human. Presently, many marine fish populations around the world are over-harvested, endangering the continued extinction of some commercially important species. Third, alien species invasion. When alien species are introduced unintentionally or deliberately for whatever purpose, some of them turn invasive and cause decline or extinction of indigenous species. The Nile perch, introduced into Lake Victoria in East Africa, led eventually to the extinction of an ecologically unique assemblage of more than 200 species of Kaiket fish in the lake. You must be familiar with the environmental damage caused and the threat posed to our native species by invasion weed species like carrot grass, parthenium, lantana, and water hyacinth, Icornia. The recent illegal introduction to of the African catfish Clarias garipinus for Aquaculture purpose is posing a threat to the indigenous catfishes in our river. Co-extinction. When a species becomes extinct, the plant and animal species associated with it in an obligatory way also become extinct. When a host fish species becomes extinct, its unique assemblage of parasites also meet the same fate. Another example is the case of the co-evolved plant pollinator mutualism, where extinction of one invariably leads to extinction of the other. 15.2 Biodiversity conservation. 15.2.15 should we conserve biodiversity? There are many reasons, some obvious and there are some not, but all equally important. They can be grouped into three categories: narrowly utilitarian, broadly utilitarian, and ethical. The narrowly utilitarian argument for conserving biodiversity are obvious. Humans derive countless direct economic benefit from nature: food, cereals, pulses, fruits, firewood, fiber, construction and material, industrial products, tannins, lubricants, dyes, resins, perfumes, and products of medicinal importance. More than 25% of the drugs currently sold in the market worldwide are derived from the plant, and 25,000 species of plant contribute to the traditional medicines used by native people around the world. Nobody knows how many more medicinal useful plants there are in the tropical rainforest waiting to be explored. With increasing resources put into spreading, exploring molecular, genetic, and species level diversity for products of economic importance, nation endowed with rich biodiversity can expect to reap enormous benefit. The broadly utilitarian argument says that biodiversity plays a major role in the economic ecosystem service that nature provides. The fast-growing Amazon rainforest estimated to produce through photosynthesis 20% of the total oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere. Can we put an economic value on the service by nature? You can get some idea by finding out how much your neighborhood hospital spend on a cylinder of oxygen. Pollination, without which plant cannot give us food or seed, is another service ecosystem provide through pollinators, layers, bees, humblebees, birds, and bats, which will be the cost of accomplishing pollination without help from nature's pollinator. There are other intangible benefit that we derive from nature: the aesthetic pleasure of walking through thick woods, watching spring flower in full bloom, or walking up to a bulbul song in the morning. Can we put a price tag on such things? The ethical argument for conserving biodiversity relative to what we owe to millions of plant, animal, and microbe species with whom we share this planet. Pass philosophically or spiritually, we need to realize that every species has an intrinsic value, even if it may not be of current or even economic value to us. We have a moral duty to care for their well-being and pass on our biological legacy in good order to future generations. 15.2.2 How do we conserve biodiversity? When we conserve and protect the whole ecosystem, its biodiversity at all levels is protected. We save the entire forest to save the tiger. The approach is called in situ, on site conservation. However, when there are situations where an animal or plant is endangered or threatened and needs urgent measure to save it from extinction, ex situ, off site conservation is the desirable approach. In situ conservation, faced with the conflict between development and conservation, many nations find it unrealistic and economically not feasible to conserve all their biological wealth. Invariably, the number of the species waiting to be saved from extinction far exceed the conservation resources available. On a global basis, the problem has been addressed by eminent conservations. They identified for maximum protection certain biodiversity hotspots, region with very high level of species richness and high degree of endemism, that species confined to that region and not found anywhere else. Initially, 25 biodiversity hotspots were identified, but subsequently nine more have been added to the list, bringing the total number of biodiversity hotspots in the world to 34. These hotspots are also region of restricted habitat loss. 3 of these hotspots, Western Ghats and Sri Lanka, Indo-Burma and Himalaya, cover our country's exceptionally high biodiversity region. Although all the biodiversity hotspots put together cover less than 2% of the total land Earth, the number of species they collectively harbor is extremely high, and strict protection of these hotspots could reduce the ongoing mass extinction by almost 30%. India ecologically unique and biodiversity rich region are legally protected as biosphere reserve national parks and sanctuaries. India now has 14 biosphere reserve, 90 national parks, and 448 wildlife sanctuaries. India has also a history of religious and cultural tradition that emphasized protection of nature. In many cultural tracts of forest were set aside, and all the trees and wildlife within were venerated and given total protection. Such sacred grove and found in the Khasi Air and Janitia Hills in Meghalaya, Aravalli Hills of Rajasthan, Western Ghats region of Karnataka and Maharashtra, and the Sarguja, Chanda and Basra areas of Madhya Pradesh. In Meghalaya, the sacred groves are the last refuge for the large number of rare and threatened plants. Ex situ conservation. In this approach, threatened animals and plants were taken out from their natural habitats and placed in special settings where they can be protected, given special care. Zoological park, botanical gardens, and wildlife safari parks serve this purpose. There are many animals that have become extinct in the wild but continue to be maintained in zoological parks. In recent years, ex situ conservation has advanced beyond keeping threatened species inclusively. Now, gametes of threatened species can be preserved in variable and fertile conditions for long period using cryptopreservation technique. Eggs can be fertilized in vitro, and plants can be propagated using tissue culture methods. Seeds of different genetic strains of commercially important plants can be kept for long period in seed banks. Biodiversity knows no political boundaries, and its conservation is therefore a collective responsibility of all nations. The historic convention on biological diversity, the Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, called upon all nations to take appropriate measures for conservation of biodiversity and sustainable utilization of its benefit. In a follow-up, the World Summit on Sustainable Development held in 2002 in Johannesburg, South Africa, 190 countries pledged their commitment to achieve by 2010 a significant reduction in the current rate of biodiversity loss at global, regional, and local areas. Some recent life originated on Earth nearly 3.8 billion years ago. There had been enormous diversification of life forms on Earth. Biodiversity refers to the sum total of diversity that exists at all levels of biological organization. Of particular importance is the diversity of genetic species and ecosystem levels, and conservation efforts are aimed to protecting diversity at all these levels. More than 1.5 million species have been recorded in the world, but there might be still nearly 6 million species on Earth waiting to be discovered and named. Of the named species, more than 70% of animals, of which 70% are insects. The group fungi has more species than all the species commonly combined in India, with about 45,000 species of plant and twice as many species of animals. Is one of the 12 mega diversity countries of the world. Species diversity on Earth is not uniformly distributed but shows interesting patterns. It is generally highest in the tropics and decreased towards the poles. Important explanation for the species richness of the tropics are: tropics had more evolutionary time, they provide a relatively constant environment, and they receive more solar energy, which contributes to greater productivity. Species richness is also functioning of the area of region. The species area relationship is generally a rectangular hyperbolic function. It is believed that communities with high diversity tend to be less variable, more productive, and more resistant to the biological invasion. Earth fossil history reveals incidents of mass extinction in the past, but the present rates of extinction largely attributed to human activities are 10 to 100 to 1000 times higher. Nearly 700 species have become extinct in recent times, and more than 15,500 species, of which more than 650 are from India, currently face the threat of extinction. The cause of high extinction rates of present include habitat, particularly forest loss and fragmentation, overexploitation, biological invasion, and co-extinction. Earth-rich biodiversity is vital for the very survival of mankind. The reasons for conserving biodiversity are narrowly utilitarian, broad utilitarian, and ethical. Besides the direct benefit, food, firewood, pharmaceutical, etc., there are many indirect benefits we receive through ecosystem service, which as pollination, pest control, climate moderation, and flood control. We also have a moral responsibility to take good care of Earth's biodiversity and pass it on a good order to our next generation. Biodiversity conservation may be in situ as well as ex situ. In the in situ, the endangered species are protected in their natural habitat so that the entire ecosystem is protected. Recently, 34 biodiversity hotspots in the world have been proposed for intensive conservation efforts. Of course, three Western Ghats, Sri Lanka, Himalaya, and Indo-Burma cover India's rich biodiversity region. Our country in situ conservation efforts are reflected in its 14 biosphere reserve, 19 national parks, more than 450 wildlife sanctuaries, and many scared groves. Ex situ species conservation methods include protective maintenance of threatened species in zoological parks and botanical gardens, in vitro fertilization, tissue culture, propagation, and cryopreservation of gametes.